next I have Brad Moore, who is the General Manager and COO of Plastic Innovation with Timeless Fence, and he is going to introduce our next speaker.
Thanks, Mike. I asked for the privilege of introducing our next speaker. I met Greg Judy about 6 or 8 years ago, I guess it was, at a grazing school in Pennsylvania. And this is the third time that we've done something like this. The first was in 2013. We had a gentleman come in from South Africa named Ian Mitchell-Ennis. Greg knows him very well. And I kept hearing this name, Greg Judy, and didn't know much about Greg. I got a chance to listen to him in Pennsylvania, in Clarion, Pennsylvania, at a grazing school, and was just incredibly impressed with his wealth of knowledge, his direct presentation. Just curious, by show of hands, how many people watch Greg on YouTube? That's what I thought. I had a lady tell me a couple of weeks ago on the phone, she said, Greg's my secret husband. She said, I sit in bed at night and watch Greg on YouTube. So you gotta watch out, Jan. But it is my pleasure, my honor to introduce our next speaker, Greg Judy with Green Pastures Farm. Greg is going to really impress you, I think, with his knowledge base and his experience. So I'm not going to waste any more time. Greg, come on up here and get after it.
Thank you, Brad. That was quite an introduction. I wouldn't want to meet that lady's husband, but so this morning we're going to talk a little bit about starting a grazing operation from scratch and some of the mistakes and successes that we've had. It's not everything that you try works, and so I want to go over the things that have worked and some of the things that haven't, maybe give you some red flags out there. How many of y'all are on a farm? Just a show of hands. How many of you all are getting ready to start? Okay, good. So we've got a good diversity out there. I just came from Joel Salatin's farm. We had the Stockman Grass Farmer Conference there last week. And I watched Joel during that conference, and he was on the front row. And one thing that I was really impressed about Joel, of course, he's got a nice farm as well, but that guy probably took more notes than anybody at that conference. Think about that. Here's one of the pioneers in the industry, and I mean, that guy, at every talk, he had 4 or 5 pages of notes. Now, I'm sure he's heard a lot of that stuff before, but I can't overemphasize enough writing down little tips that you can bring back home with you, because when you get home in, let's say, 3 or 4 days, you can't remember everything you hear. And I think that's been one of my successes. I am a note taker, and thank you, Alan. That was a great talk. I took a lot of notes on Alan, and I've heard Alan speak before, but every time there's little diamonds in the rough out there you can write down. I don't care how many times you hear somebody. They may say it differently, but write that down. You can come back to that a year from now, 10 years from now. It's awesome information. Let's see if I can get this thing going. So basically what we're doing, folks, is we're taking a ruminant animal and we're harvesting solar energy through the green leaf. And Jan and I, we farm in central Missouri, halfway between St. Louis and Kansas City. And it's a 38 to 40 inch rainfall area. So those of you all that are just starting out and you're getting ready to set up a farm, my suggestion to you would be go someplace where it rains. Don't handicap yourself. If you can pick a spot, go someplace that it rains. I wouldn't set up a grass-finished operation in Arizona or New Mexico. I want to go someplace that I can depend on Mother Nature helping me a little bit with some moisture. So, and the other thing I would look at, we're talking about unfair advantages. Go someplace where you have something that grows green, perennial in the wintertime. We're talking fescue. Everybody, talks about the bad effects of fescue, but that's one of the beautiful things about, what Teddy did. Teddy Gentry, you all hear him speak today too, was Teddy is in Alabama, the deep, south, heat, fescue, humidity, and so you've got to get the right kind of animals. And that's a picture of some of our animals that are doing well on a grass that people hate. They hate it. People hate Kentucky 31, and people are spraying it and killing it. We're making a living on it. We're going to talk about some of the things that we've done to do that. So we are not grass farmers. We are actually microbe farmers. If we feed the microbes will feed our livestock. And once we feed the livestock, of course, the livestock feed us. So I heard Ian talk years ago, Ian Michelinus from South Africa, and that's the one thing that nailed me. He said, we're not, he's a big old South African, and he goes, we're not grass farmers. I'm like, well, yeah, we are. I kind of, pride myself on being a grass farmer. He said, no, it all starts in the soil. And so when you walk on your soils, learn to feel it under your feet. When you walk onto a pasture that hasn't been grazed, close your eyes and feel it. It should have some softness to it. There ought to be like walking on a sponge. If you're walking on that pasture and it's hard, it feels like concrete, you've got some issues. You've got some work to do. So we are in the solar energy business. That's one of our, well, actually Isaac now is our full-time employee. Happy to report that. Isaac has come to work for us full-time. That is the eastern gammon grass leaf that he's holding up there. We measured that. It was right at 4 feet long. So when the cattle come into an eastern gammon grass field, we're not looking at them taking that thing down all the way. We're just trying to take the top parts and letting it grow back. Now, when I said it's an eastern gammon grass field, look behind that young man. What's growing in there? There's everything. It's not just a monoculture. And I think Alan really did a good job of laying that out. We don't want a monoculture. I mean, I love gammon grass, don't get me wrong, but I don't want a solid stand of it. And when we put that stuff out years ago, now this field was drilled, eastern gammon grass. To get a really good stand, we did drill it. And we were told, don't graze it. I'm like, what? What do you mean don't graze it? Well, you got to hay it. I'm like, I hate putting up hay. I'm not going to put hay up on our farm. Well, you're going to lose it. I'm like, what do you mean? Well, all this other stuff will come in there. I'm like, that's kind of what we want, other stuff. So, yeah, and it did. We grazed it and other stuff came into it, and I love that. I love the diversity. So this is a field that we used to have. It was all cockleburs. That was a soybean field. Well, all we did was we brought in hay in the wintertime, started unrolling hay on that bare ground the first winter. And that's what came up over time. So we didn't really seed anything in there other than the seed that was in the seed bank. And, Ian has always said there's never been a seeding done, ever, that will pay for itself as good as what Mother Nature will put there. And I get this all the time. People are like, Greg, what kind of seed do I, please give me a recommendation to seed. I'm like, 4 hooves. Get 4 hooves out there. If you're extremely wealthy and you want to put seed out there, go for it. Have fun. But if you're going to put seed out there, go to the road bank. Go to the road bank. See what's growing in that road bank. That's what you plant because you know it's adapted. It's growing in that area. If you buy some fancy seed that they've come out and done all these trials on and they guarantee you 3 to 4 pounds a day gain, you don't know if that stuff's going to come up. You're going to have thousands of dollars in seed. So I wouldn't recommend doing that. So, in the springtime, when do you start grazing? This is a mistake that we used to make years ago. We would get on the grass when it was too early in the springtime. Folks, if you're just starting out and you haven't grazed livestock and you haven't grown grass, you've got to have something there to graze. And in the springtime, if you get started too quickly going across your farm, you're coming out of winter and not realize that. You've been feeding hay and you're sick of it. Maybe you ran out of winter stockpile. Well, when you get done with these 3 days, hopefully you'll have enough ammunition in your belt when you go home. You won't be running out of winter stockpile. That's called management. Measuring how much grass you have out there before dormant season ever gets there. You shouldn't run out of winter stockpile. Winter stockpile feeds your animals through the whole winter while things aren't growing. And if you stocked appropriately going into that, you should have some of this winter stockpile left in March mud month. Now in Missouri, that's our most difficult month to manage through is March mud month because we get a lot of moisture in March and it gets soupy out there. Folks, you gotta have some winter stockpile. that stuff will keep you going. And that's because it's fescue. It'll hold those cows up in a rainstorm. I mean, if you have a big herd. I can remember when we first started doing this mob grazing back in 2006. And we had 11 days that never stopped raining. It rained every single day. Some days it rained 4 inches. I mean, it was just, I told people water would sit on top of the hill. It refused to run off the hill. That's how wet it was. And so I'm crying to Ian. I'm emailing, Ian, oh my God, my pastures, they're terrible. And Ian's very blunt. He goes, well, I guess the buffalo looked at each other and cried and decided they weren't going to move in the old days. I'm like, no, they probably didn't cry. He said, they moved. Give them a bigger area, move them. That's when you need some winter stockpile to move them on to, because we don't have a sacrifice area on our farm. Now, I'm not telling you you don't need one, but we don't have one. A sacrifice lot is someplace you put them when they're tearing your farm up. Well, we've come up with a solution. We like 900 to 1,000 pound cows. Did y'all hear that? Why do you got a 1,400 pound cow out there in March mud month? She will destroy your farm. She absolutely will. She's going to plow it. She's going to take her down about that deep across your whole farm. There went all your sod and all your grass for the coming growing season. Now, you talk about weeds, you're going to have weeds. Mother Nature hates bare soil, absolutely hates it. She's going to put a weed there every time. So here we are coming into spring. The leaves are just starting to blossom a little bit. Folks, there's 6 to 7 inches of grass there. We're moving them, but we're making sure we don't take it down too short. I think that's a mistake you can make on your first rotation, chopping the baby's head off. We call it a baby. It's a baby grass plant. It hasn't put on a seed yet, hasn't even put on a stem, and you go in there and take over 50% of that plant. And that's because you weren't monitoring. Maybe you didn't even know any better. Don't do that. Don't do that. Give them a bigger area and move them faster. So I'm not going to give you a recipe. I think that's a disaster, but I'm going to give you a rough footprint. So on our farm in Missouri, we're always looking at spring. We call it spring flush. We're going to get around, well, we just picked up 2 more farms this year. We got 18 farms now. We're going to get around 18 farms in about 20 days, 25 days, 20 to 25 days. If we don't get around all 18 farms, we're just going to forget we control about 4 of those, and we're going to leave those off. We're not going to graze them. People are going, well, Greg, if you don't graze those farms in the spring, what's going to happen? Well, you heard Alan talk about mixing it up a little bit. It doesn't hurt to rest some of that in the spring. Let that stuff grow up, and then maybe come back in July and August when it hasn't rained. Maybe it hasn't rained for 6 weeks. 90 degrees, 95. The neighbors are unrolling hay or putting out a bale ring. They don't unroll hay. They put it in a ring. We're not doing that. We're giving our cows this stockpile that we grew in the springtime. And people says, but Greg, it's mature, it's rank. They're not going to do well on that. They'll do all right. They'll do just fine. But folks, they'll trample a lot of that rough stuff on the ground. Carbon, we can't get enough carbon. We need all the carbon we can possibly trample on the ground. It's awesome stuff. So that's our winter grazing. That's our last rotation across. That would be the second graze around that farm. So the first grazing, we took off about 1/3. The second grazing, we came back and took another 1/3. And people say, but why are you grazing around your farm twice in the wintertime? I'll tell you what. Animals are happy when they are moved. They're healthier when they are moved. And in the wintertime, if you'll keep moving those animals around your farm, even if you get stuck and let's say you run out of winter stockpile, well, darn it, keep moving them, but roll some hay out there. You're covering your whole farm with fertility. It's going to pay you huge dividends. And that was one of the mistakes that I made starting out. You know, we didn't know anything, and we put out bale rings and didn't move the animals. We didn't want them tearing up our farm. And folks, where we did that at, you didn't grow any grass there for 2 years. All you grew was common ragweed. Don't do that. Now, you notice they're on the side of that dam. That is on a lease farm. That's a $30,000 dam. The landowner paid for it. Talking about monitoring, you don't put animals on the side of a landowner's dam if it's wet. It's got to be frozen. So all these little deals that you just, well, we're going to move them into that pasture. No, not if it's rained. I would never put them on that dam if it was wet. So you got to be monitoring all the time. This is a new farm. So this is the one we've had since, well, it's actually 4 years now. Boy, time goes by quick. This is a farm that was no livestock for 70 years. And I looked at it, and because we fastened onto it on 3 sides, there wasn't a lot of grass there. And that's the one thing I want to mention to you all. It doesn't need to be a big farm for you to go after. Not if it touches you, or if you can walk animals down a road ditch a half a mile to get to it. Start looking around your neighborhood. Start looking around your neighborhood, because if you can pick up a 5 or 10 acre tract down the road from you, that's, let's say you get 2 or 3 days off of that. That's 3 days they're not on your farm. It's huge. It's huge. It builds your recovery period. So this particular farm, it's 120 acres. When we leased it, I measured it. You can do that on Google Maps. Actually, it's a tool called Google Planimeter. You can go online and you can pull up your farm. It's spelled Planemeter. Google Planimeter. And there's one there that's called ACME. ACME. Anyway, you pull that map up of your farm or a potential farm. That's what I did on this one. Any farm that I lease, before I even go and approach the landowner, I want to see how much grazable acreage is there. Folks, you can't give $40 an acre for timber to graze. It takes 40 acres of timber to equal 1 acre of pasture. You can't do that. The only way you can make a return on these leased farms or leasing is you got to know how much grazable land's there. Now, if it's interspersed with trees, I'm going to look at that as a silvopasture. I can go in there and pick up some more pasture over time. But you got to know how much acreage you've got there before you approach the landowner. Well, this one, I looked at it and I'm like, man, there's a lot of potential here. It's a super, super high quality hunting farm. And we control the hunting on the farms that we lease. And so just on the lease, on the hunting lease on this farm, people pay us a lot of money to hunt. This particular landowner, they didn't live on the farm. I love absentee landowners, by the way. Y'all know why? They're not after pestering you. They also appreciate you more. And that's because you are the eyes and ears of their farm. We're going to talk more about that on another talk on leasing. But we got a 10-year lease on this farm. There's another picture of it. That bottom picture there, that's what the neighbors do. So in the wintertime, they'll put their animals up in a lot and they leave them there all winter long. We're moving. So, Alan was talking about, that constant movement, that pharmacy that's out there on the farm. Folks, we don't worm our animals. The only thing we give is anything 2 years and under, we do vaccinate for blackleg. I think that's a big one. If you're not vaccinating for blackleg, you're playing Russian roulette. Because we didn't have it for 18 years, and I never vaccinated, then I got hit. We were running some pigs, and the pigs did quite a bit of rooting back in the timber, and the cattle went in and were exposed to all that bare soil, and we got blackleg. You can't treat blackleg, it kills animals. So protect yourself. You got a sizable investment in these animals, give them that blackleg shot. It's $1. It's $1. So this is an animal that was brought in from Mexico. Jan and I went down there to Chihuahua, and there's a fella down there. He started a herd many years back, and the story was he brought in 500 cows, and he never brought another animal into the herd over like 60 or 70 years. And so these animals developed on a high desert, I think 4 to 6 inches of rain a year. That's in Texas, by the way. That's not Chihuahua. And so any animal that can get that kind of condition on them, they ate rocks and they ate sticker bushes. That's what was there. There wasn't any grass down there. But that's what adapted to that environment. So that's the kind of animals that we're looking for, is something that's low to the ground, has a big gut, and can do it on solely grass and legumes and forbs. So we're talking about microbe feeders. We're actually moving the animals around constantly. We don't have the predators anymore like they do in South Africa. You know, the lions and the leopards, the hyenas. They have packs of wild dogs over there. But we do have the electric fence. That is our predator. And so we have an unfair advantage. You know, that's a beautiful piece of technology. And I think technology is great. I'm a little bit concerned. There's a lot of talk now being done about, radio collaring and, moving the animals from your computer and all that. That's all fine and dandy, but folks, don't take your eyes off your animals. Don't take your eyes off the land. Because if you become a remote farmer and you're not out there on the land with those animals, I think you're going to have a train wreck. You've got to be observing those animals. And you can't do that from a computer. You can't do it from a drone. You got to get down and look at the ground. I enjoy this part, and so I don't want somebody taking this away from me. That's why I do it, is to get out on the land with the animals. There's more weight in pounds per acre below the soil than above the soil in healthy pastures. One of the best videos I ever saw was Dr. Pat Richardson. She was a professor from Texas. I think there's still some of her videos on YouTube. Dr. Pat Richardson. And Pat gave the talk about where, she gave the example of this. If this table here was all set down to eat dinner, and they had a nice 4-course meal, and they're all getting ready to eat, and some yahoo comes up on the table with a little disc and just runs the disc down through that dinner table. Just disc at one time. Are the people sitting at that table going to be happy chaps? No. And she did a study the same day. She went out on a healthy pasture, and she just ran a disc down at one time. That's it. And it wasn't it wasn't even cut at an angle. It was just cutting holes in the dirt or in the soil. One disc. But she measured the soil life before and after. One pass, she killed 80%. 80% of the soil life was killed with one pass with a disc. And she wasn't ripping the soil, she was just cutting it. So we need to look at our pastures and be careful what you drive out there on them, especially when it's wet. That's why I will not let anybody drive on our farm with a truck unless it's frozen or if we're in a 4-week drought. And even then, I don't want you driving out there, not even in a drought. 4-wheeler. If you don't have one, you want to get around your farm, get one. Don't be driving your pickup out there, because a pickup does different than an ATV. It doesn't have the flotation tires on it. So you're driving on those animals' breakfast. That's their breakfast out there, and you're driving on it. Doesn't make sense. Burn or graze. There are times that you can burn. There's times that you should graze. I used to be a big burn alcoholic. I'll admit it. I was an alcoholic for burning. I love doing it. And I think there is still a time you can use a fire, but I think we overuse it. I see it around the neighborhood. I mean, people are just burning everything. In South Africa, they're burning the whole country. The natives believe over there, unless you burn off your pastures, your cattle will starve to death the following year. You got to burn it to get it back vegetating. Ian's convinced they're going to turn South Africa into the Sahara Desert, because burning promotes plant spacing. The more you burn, the plants get further apart. The more you graze, the plants come closer together. Well, we're in the business of growing plants, aren't we? Let's use the animals. Now, there are opportunities to use a fire. Let's say you lease the farm and there's 10,000 little cedars out there. And they're that tall. And you got all this lush or this dry forage around them. I'd be pretty tempted to throw a match on that just to get rid of the cedars so I don't have to fight in the rest of my life. And you could do that. But this is a lease farm. This is owned by a judge. And we got that one several years back. It's just unbelievable. So, soil building recipe: add a mob of ruminant animals, start trampling that carbon onto the soil surface, followed by a full recovery period. Got to have that recovery period. This is a lease farm that we now own. We started out leasing and we were able to buy that. But folks, that was all broom sedge when we got it. How many of y'all know what broom sedge is? Yeah, y'all got it here in Tennessee, I know that. I'm glad that Missouri's not the only state that has it. It's the poverty grass. Some people call it bankruptcy grass, broom straw. There's lots of different names for it. It's just a grass that if you've got it on your farm, it's a sign of poor fertility. Your pH is super, super low. You need to unroll some hay on that. You might even, jump start a little bit by putting a little lime down on it. Weeds. What are weeds? Well, this is one of the best weeds that we have growing on our farm right there. And my neighbors, they see that stuff and they're out there brush hogging it. They just brush hogged the best forage in the paddock. They chopped it up and put it on the ground. They lost thousands of dollars. There's a lot of gain right there. That's giant ragweed. If you've got giant ragweed on your farm, learn to identify it. It's a great forage. I have a friend in Texas. He was running heifers in giant ragweed that was 12 feet high. 12 feet. He lost them in there. He couldn't find them. So he went in there with a mule, and he's driving through the weeds and just really having a hard time. And he finally found them down in there, and he said they were as fat as pigs. So he was convinced he needed to learn how to combine it. I'm like, don't you tell anybody you combine that. It might throw you in prison or something. Don't graze the roots. We heard a little bit about that on Alan's talk. Make sure the plants are fully recovered. How do you know that? Well, this is your plant, and you've grazed it off in your last rotation, and you come back in 2 or 3 weeks to see how it's doing. If it's still flat on the very top of the plant, in other words, you took the knife and cut it off, if it's still flat, it's not recovered. If it comes to a sharp point, you're good to go. You can graze that plant safely, and you're not grazing the roots off. If you come back too soon, we call that eating your seed corn. In other words, you're not going to have anything to plant next year, or in grass farming terms, you're not going to have anything to graze. You keep doing that, and by July and August, you're out of grass. There will be no stockpile grown on your farm. There won't be anything there. Okay, stock and density versus stock and rate. It's two different terms. I get a lot of emails from people, how many of this and how many of that, and I'm like, wait a minute. Stock and density is the number of animals that are on a paddock for a certain time. So we'll have neighbors come by, and they just freak out. They'll see all these animals on this area. And I had one old guy stop me and said, that ain't right what you're doing there, boy. That's what he told me. He called me a boy. He was older. He had the right to call me a boy. And I said, well, what's wrong? He said, you're stressing them animals. I'm like, what? You're stressing them. He said, you need to take that wire down and give them the whole farm. And I'm like, well, sir, that's the third time they've been moved this morning. They're all eating. There's nothing balling. They're all fat. I don't see anything stressed there. You got them in there too tight. And he finally I tried to explain what I was doing. He got in his truck and he drove off. Well, he had a big round bale on the back of his truck. He was hot. He was feeding hay and I wasn't. And he said, that farm will do better, the animals do better, and you'll do better. Just give them the whole farm. Folks, people are not going to embrace what you're doing. I'll tell you why. You're making them feel uncomfortable. You really are. You're going outside the box. And human beings like being in a herd, a mob. And we move outside that mob, people start poking fun at you. When Teddy started the South Pole herd years ago, people were making fun, you got that it's a different looking animal, and you got to get them bigger, and the Packers want them bigger. Didn't we hear that, Teddy? And Teddy, he stood firm. He said, no, I'm not going to do it. So it takes dedication. You've got to be humble. If you've got pride, you're in trouble. You got to be humble. I mean, everybody in our neighborhood thinks Jan and I are just nuts. I like that. I do. I love it. I want the neighbors talking about us. If they're not talking about us, It's like Alan said, we've fallen back into that groove. We're doing the same thing every single year. You're not going to advance forward. Gabe Brown, a good friend of mine, says, Greg, you need to try and fail at least one thing a year. You need to try and fail at least one thing a year. If you don't, you're not trying enough new things, period. So stocking rate is the number of animals that are on a farm for a calendar year. That's the difference between those two. So here's a farm we leased, and this is a farm that had animals on it for, there was 12 cows in a bull on that farm for about 70 years. Not the same 12 cows. They were different. But that old guy, he gave him 160 acres, and they had the whole farm. And you could walk around that farm. I don't care if it's a spring flush or the summer, a good growing season, a bad growing season. It looked the same every year. Cows are thin, and there wasn't any grass. Even in the spring flush, there was no grass. So when Jan and I had the opportunity to lease this, the first thing we did is we gave it a sabbatical, and I recommend you all do the same thing. If you lease a piece of ground that's been continuously grazed, don't bring animals right into that. Let that farm have a rest. Let it grow back. Because if you tried to haul all that carbon in there that we grew, we knew we had to get carbon on the land. We grew it. We didn't haul it in. We didn't have to buy it. We just let it grow. You need to do that. So that's day one. We put in our wire, and that grass got to be so tall in there with some rest that we had to put it in the four-wheeler path. Otherwise, the animals wouldn't see that wire. They'd walk right through it. So there's day two. The animals are left on that, but we had them at about 100,000 pound stocking density, and we moved them twice, morning and night. And you can see what's there on the ground. Now, in my old days, I'd say, you know what, girls? I think I'm going to leave you here another day and let you graze that. No, you don't want to do that. We need to move them. So there's the litter they trampled on the ground. There's a lot of feed there. Folks, they will eat that if you leave them there, but they already did the job you wanted them to do. They fed themselves, and they left a nice litter layer on the ground. Learn to hate bare soil. If you've got a bare soil spot on your farm, even if it's around a water tank, before you leave, put some hay on it, just a thin layer of hay. Learn to hate it. And if let's say you're in the middle of rain season and the cows muck up an area and you're moving forward, well, that'll grow back. No, go in there and put some hay on it. It'll heal a lot quicker, and nature may put something there besides giant ragweed. Or not giant, common ragweed. I hate common ragweed. They don't eat it as well. I shouldn't say I hate it. I just don't like it as well as I do giant. So there it is 1 month later. All that grass that young man was holding is now composted down in the soil, and the legumes are coming up. We didn't plant those legumes. And the old guy that owned that, he never planted any. There was seed in that seed bank. Look at that. I mean, that's just beautiful. It's coming back nice. And now that carbon that those cattle trampled, the earthworms, this is about 6 weeks later, the earthworms have eaten all that. And now I've got a solid layer of earthworm castings on that whole farm. Compliments of the cattle and our management. So learn to waste, if you want to call it that, learn to waste some grass. It's not a bad thing to leave some behind. It really isn't. And that was the hardest thing for Marshall, my old landowner, owned this farm. That was the hardest thing for him. He never did get over it. I never did convince him that what we were doing was working. Because he thought we were wasting grass. And I'd leave his farm. We'd be on his farm for about 2 weeks, grazing through there, maybe 10 days. He's like, Greg, where are you going? I'm like, I'm leaving. Oh, there's all this grass. What are you doing? I'm like, that's why you have a lot of grass, is because we're leaving some. So you got to leave some behind. You can't take it all. That's a hard thing to get over, but if you'll adopt this mentality, and it's just a good way of thinking. For every blade of grass that your animals trample on the ground, you get 2 back. That's a real good way to think about it. And it's like putting in a savings account. You're putting a deposit in your savings account. And maybe later in the summer, when you get that other blade of grass coming up as a complement of doing that, now you're going to draw some interest on that. You're going to harvest a little bit of that. There's the earthworm castings. So that's the earthworm turd. They ate that grass. And if you look down on the surface of the ground, it's kind of shiny looking. That's all solid castings. All that is solid castings. It's just greasy looking. That's a castle. That earthworm, he ate and ate and ate. So this is our unfair advantage in fescue country. We can get cold weather, minus 10 below zero. This last winter we had a time that it was minus 30 wind chill. That stockpile maintains its quality in cold weather. That's the beautiful thing about fescue. It's got a waxy leaf, and animals can do very well, and you're not out there unrolling hay. I hate feeding hay. Sometimes you have to do it. We call it insurance. And I think starting out, you need to have an insurance policy out there, because if you get a foot of snow, if you live where there's snow and ice, what are you going to feed them? Don't be stuck where you got to go find it, because you're not going to get it. You may not be able to even get it onto your farm. And if all your grass is covered in ice, you're in between a rock and a hard place. So there's some young animals. We run the steers and the cow herd together. There's stockers there that are grazing underneath hot wire. That's in January. You can still see there's some green in there. Now it's been cold, but those animals are taking it down like that. That's what it looked like when they came out. There's just a ton of forage there. Also, we found out that the taller you can graze that stockpile in the fall. If you do get a snow on top of it, the stockpile actually melts the snow off. And that's because that sun is radiant heat on those blades of grass sticking up, and it melts the snow. So that's another advantage of having winter stockpile. There we go. Isn't that pretty? Talking about weeds. Yeah. Golly, that brings back memories. That's the bean field. That's that bean field that I was laying down in earlier. So the first year it came up in cockleburrs, and I had this mindset that it was a burr, it was a bad thing, and I was going to get it. I didn't own a tractor. I didn't own a brush hog, and it was right by the blacktop. That's a major blacktop right over there. So everybody's driving by laughing at me. It had to be right by a public road. So we put those cows in there at about 300,000 pound stocking density, and they ate them. They ate the burrs. They ate it all. They even ate the stalks down flush with the ground. And boy, I showed them burrs a thing or two. Whipped them. No. Next year they came back worse. And Ian was there. That's back when we were doing fall grazing schools. And Ian goes, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, "Getting rid of them burrs." And he says, "It looks like you're doing a good job of it." I mean, the whole field. We had burrs, folks, that had stalks on them that big around. The cattle would go into a field of them and use them as shade. That's how tall they were. And Ian says, "When are you going to get tired of grazing those birds?" I was like, "I was tired a year ago." He said, "Well, then quit grazing it like you're grazing it." So sometimes it takes another person to come onto your farm to tell you what you're doing wrong. Folks, I was so focused on those darn birds, and I knew I could make the cattle eat them, that I was going to get rid of them. I was going to get rid of all the plants so they couldn't drop seed. There was enough seed on that farm for the next 100 years. That was not working. So you manage for what you want. We wanted good grass. We wanted forages. We wanted the clovers. And so Ian made one comment. He said, "Just act like you don't own it next spring. Act like you don't own it." So this is a big farm. It's our biggest. He said, "When you come to this farm, this part of the farm, just go around it." I'm like, "What? It's going to have some good grass in it." He said, "Go around it." So we did. We skipped it. The next spring, we let it go, and it got up there, orchard grass, fescue, clover. There was all kinds of different forbs in there. And I went in there, and so you got to target when's the weakest point of a plant. emergence, when it comes out of the ground in the springtime. Well, cockleburs in mid-Missouri, that's June 1st. June 1st. So on your first grazing spring flush going around your farm, where you got a lot of cockleburs or Canadian thistle, you might want to think about skipping that area. Let those plants get out there. They will kick that thing in the teeth. And that's what happened. It grew up, and I came in there in June and opened up that canopy and looked down in there. There were millions of little burrs, millions of them, across this whole field. And every single one of them were about that tall, and they were yellow. They couldn't get any sunlight. Whipped it. Those other more beneficial grasses just went boom, buried it. That's because I didn't graze it. Now, the count back the year before that, I went in and I grazed it off, and now the birds are like, ha ha, sunlight, here we come, kaboom, here they came. And so when I brought the cattle in to graze off the birds in, let's say, the latter part of June, July, what happened is the cows came in and grazed off my orchard grass, the fescue and the clover first. They took that off, but they took her to the ground. They took it all the way to the ground. You couldn't even find the plants. Then they ate the burrs. So who was winning in that little deal? The burrs. Every time. So graze for what you want. We do that so we don't bring a tractor out on our farms. That's a little bale unroller that I designed, and now we are manufacturing those. We're selling them, and they work great. You can use a four-wheeler, feed hay. You don't need to own a tractor. You don't need to feed that whole bale. You can unroll a third of it, jack it back up, take it back to the barn. You're not getting a big implement, and you're spreading fertility. You notice where those bales are stacked. They're on a hill. They're easy to get to. I just pull them off, and we'll unroll some hay as we come by there if we need to. There's in the wintertime. This is what it looks like when they go into it. That's what it looks like when they come out. So we may go in on a Monday if we got a lot of snow, and we'll unroll hay. There's our next feeding over there. There's a polywire. We kind of treat it like stockpile. We may unroll 5 days' worth. And then we just unroll a wire each morning. We do get snow. That was a good one. That snow was so deep that the hay wouldn't unroll. So I actually made windrows out there with a blade and bladed it. And then I put my cattle on it, and unrolled hay in those windrows. I'm not going to do a bale ring. I don't care how deep the snow gets. We're going to do that. The next year, that paddock absolutely exploded. This is on a lease farm. So we ran out on that farm. We're going to the next farm. We walk them down roads. We don't like it on the blacktop, but the snow was so deep, there was 3 and 4 foot drifts. The cattle couldn't make it through. So we took them down a blacktop. They're happy to go. They're ready to go to the next farm. The sheep, talking about multi-species. Sheep are a lot easier to winter than cattle. We'll talk about that in another talk. Ice, we get our share of ice. Snow, we have found that if you try and graze through ice, you're wasting a lot of good stockpile, because what happens is the animals step on it, it doesn't come back up. So an animal grazes with 5 mouths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if they step on, if it's got ice on it, you just wasted a ton of good forage. I'd rather feed hay while the ice is on until that ice gets off. Then I'm back grazing again. Pigs in the timber, this is the way we used to do it. As soon as the pigs came out, we put a cover crop on it. The folks that were running pigs on the farm, they didn't do a lot of that. So we had a lot of bare ground. There's a mob grazed paddock. Sometime in the future, or past, somebody had clover in there, it looks like. When we put the mob on it and hit it pretty hard and gave it a recovery, that's what came up. Talking about bruising the soil. So folks, an animal has a cloven hoof. Every time it steps on the ground, it opens up. And so it's bruising the top of that soil. It's chopping up that litter. There's the riparian area that we've healed just with the mob. Water source, that is not a water source. We just leased that farm several years back. Our landowner bought it, actually. And the previous landowner that lived there was always using my head catch. I mean, he was calling me every week. He always had sick animals. I'm like, man, dude, what's up with your, and then I got to look at, he was making them drink that. It's poop and pee all the way around it. He had bales around the edge of it. It's just a mess. Folks, your animals need good water, and if you give them crappy water, you could expect to have issues. On sheep and goats are even more picky. The smaller the animal, the more picky they are. If you can drink it, your livestock will do well. There's the gamma. We got big blue stem now coming up on our farms. There's some cover crop that we put in. That was a cover crop in Kentucky 31 fescue. No rain. So I tell you, folks, when you start doing this grazing, when you got a really healthy soil, it's amazing what'll come up in there. That was a 9-way species right there. We got the dung beetle coming back. There's the holes from the dung beetle. We like seeing the dung beetles. They are actually rolling up a ball. So your dung beetle actually puts a baby, lays an egg in there, and that ball is brought down the bottom of a tunnel. And when the baby dung beetle hatches, that's his nourishment until he completes the life cycle, starts over again. Then he starts raising a family and doing the same thing. It's kind of neat to watch them do that. Good microbe function, look at your manure. Learn to love manure pats. Go out there and spread them open, look at them. That's a good one right there. Healthy soil equals healthy animals. You got to have both. If you don't know anything about grass finishing beef, learn to read your animals when they're getting close to being finished. The tail head, you start getting those nice fat wrinkles in the back of that tail head. You're getting pretty darn close. If you butcher an animal that doesn't have fat in the tail head, he's not going to have any fat cover. And we're not talking, grass-fed beef. Oh, we like lean beef. No, you don't. You need to have some fat in there. That's what gives you the flavor. That's where the good comes from, the beta-carotenes in your grasses. We learn to use unfair advantages. We'll talk about that more. Going to work, you got to feed the soil. Good grazing management, you're trampling carbon. Every grass blade, we talked about that, gives you 2 back. Get a spade out. How many of y'all have dig in your soil regularly? Learn to keep a spade on your ATV, a little one. Dig in your soil. Look at it. When you pull it open and put it in your hands, is it crumbly? Does it fall apart? Or is it like a glob? If it's like a glob, your water is not getting good infiltration in there. You need more carbon. You got compaction in your soil. Roots. Everybody talks about root plows, getting a real big, deep ripper and ripping your soil. The best tool we have are plant roots. It doesn't cost anything to do that either. It's just management. So the deeper you rip your soil with this mechanical stuff, you're just developing a new hard pan. That's all you're doing. Plant roots, they break down, and then all the water and all the nutrients, everything follows the plant roots. We've got a lot of compacted soil in the United States. Keep it simple. One herd as many months of the year as possible. Increase your stocking density. Move them frequently. If you're moving them right now once a year, or, let's say twice a year, spring and fall, you might try 4 times a year. And then go to 10 and 15. Whatever it takes, you're going to see the more you start moving those animals, you're going to start seeing some really neat positive changes. 80% is hay, your yearly animal cost. You don't want to do a lot of that. Where's the money going if I do this? Example, if you spray your farm, if you seed a new variety, where's the money going? Who's making the money? It's not the farmer. And that's what irks me about Kentucky 31 is all the universities now are promoting spraying it with glyphosate, then coming back in there and seeding it, and in 5 years, it's right back to Kentucky 31. Who's making the money on that one, Alan? It's not the farmer. Nope. And Alan did a study, I think a calculation, and the true cost, they say it's only like $250 an acre to convert it. It's a whole lot more than that. It's $800 an acre. Because you've got to calculate in all that lost grazing. Because when you spray your whole farm, what are they going to eat? Professor didn't think about that. That's your problem. What if that grass doesn't come up? You had grass, you killed it. Be careful, folks. There's a lot of stuff out there that'll just wipe you out. Don't spend money on anything unless it eats grass. That's a good one. How many tractors have calves? Metal destroys wealth, and that's because it rusts. It's depreciation. You've got to have grass. Investing in your future, we like to think of that. So we changed paradigms today. We're 80% leased, 20% owned. We'll talk more about that. What's cheaper than free? So you can grow animals like this with this grass, solar blade, solar collector. Folks, it just insulates you. A lot of things can go wrong, but if your cost, you don't have any, you can afford to have a few things go wrong. It's not going to put you out of business. Grows without cultivation, things improve each year, and Alan's right. We just keep seeing things get better every year. You should. If you're going the other way, you're doing something wrong. There's early spring growth, fall stockpile grass. Focus on investing your money in something that eats grass. There should be enough forage left in that herd to feed that herd for one more day. So when you move them out, that's how much should be there. Learn to do that. How often you move it, we talked a little bit about that. Fast moves when it's growing fast, slow moves when it's growing slow. Observe the behavior of your animals. Controlled grazing versus continue. That's my neighbor on the right. Who do you think's capturing the most rainwater there? The farm on the left. And they're running about 20 head. But it's continuous on 100 acres. 100 acres, that's ridiculous. They're not capturing any solar energy. Look at the length of their leaves. They don't have any leaves. There we go. That's overgrazing, and I will admit that's me. First year I did it. Folks, you don't want that. If animals are reaching underneath the wire and they've grazed it off, I don't have any carbon left standing. They even ate the litter on this paddock to the left. And the animals, you can't see it because it doesn't show up, but they were limited. Those animals are limited. We're going to talk more about that in another talk. Don't do that. So this is all the things we're starting to see. Less hay feeding, no seeding, no fertilizer, limited lime. We went from 4 acres per cow unit to 2. Ian thinks we can get down to 1 acre. We might. If we do, we can run twice as many animals. So we're duplicating nature, basically. Think about every species supports 8 more. And I don't care what that species is. How much time have I got left? 1 minute, I'm done. Just go through the rest of these slides. Look for spider webs, that's a cool one. Starting to do some lumber, some shiitake logs. Folks, quote, nothing in nature is given, it is won. No, it's not. We need to learn to work with nature. And we will, everybody wins. Learn to harvest the energy. And I'm going to stop right there. That's our website, greenpasturesfarm.net. And there's quite a bit of stuff on that. And with that,
Questions.
Got a little bit of time for any questions if we have any. Yes, sir. I'll repeat the question. What is it? Yeah, so how did we put the cover crops into that fescue? We put it in July. It was warm season annuals we put out, and we drilled it. We went to the NRCS office because we don't own a tractor. I borrowed a tractor. I rented a tractor, and you can rent a grain drill or a grass drill from your local NRCS office. It's like $10 an acre. And that's how I just drilled it. Yep. Drilled it in, and it came up really well. Yes, sir, on the back.
Question about, you said you don't seed much and stuff like that. How do you get winter-type grass established in the further south, like southwest Arkansas? We don't really get a lot of fescue growing naturally. It's really hot in the summer that kills it off. Is there something that we can do to get some more winter-type grass down there?
Well, in the wintertime, first of all, any grasses that we grow besides fescue, they don't stay around. Orchard grass, timothy, bluegrass, red top, all the warm seasons, they're just gone. And so I try and keep some clover in there. So if I can have a little bit of clover with that stockpile fescue, I'm good. That's really high quality forage. So that's kind of our goal, is to make sure we keep some clovers in there. Because I think a solid stand of Kentucky 31 is a beast. And you're going to start having animal performance issues. Yeah, Teddy.
What?
Let me get Teddy right here. Then I'll get you. Yes. Go ahead and talk into that.
Your drilling in, does that disturb you said 80% a while ago, you were talking about with one pass with a hire. Does it disturb your soil and?
Yes, yeah, so how we get that in there, you've got to have pasture disturbance. You've got to beat fescue up. It's a beast. And the way to get that clover in there, you've got to, is in the wintertime. If you come out in the winter on your fescues like this, you're not going to have any clover in there. You've got to beat it up. You've got to give it that, trampling, and then it'll just come in. You don't need to seed it. It's there. There's white clover and red clover both. You had a question back there.
Yeah, you mentioned that you want to bring the animals back in after a full recovery. You mentioned that you want to look for the point in the plant as opposed to the flat. Is that a sign of full recovery?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so when the plant grows back to a pin prick, it's sharp on the end, that plant's ready to graze. If it's still flat on the top, you came around too quick, and you start grazing those plants off, you're just chasing your tail from that point on. Yeah, don't do that. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Okay, I've been to your place. I've seen how your fences are. And I had a neighbor bring this up to me the other day about our electric fences, about the electric fences. Have you ever had somebody touch your electric fence and try to put a claim on for something?
And try and do what?
A claim, for...
Oh, like sue me?
Yeah,
No.
or complain about it.
No, I've never had anybody touch our fence and try and sue us. If you touch our fence, you only touch it once.
I agree that, but
you just got a big old stupid sign here on your forehead. Don't touch the fence.
But it's out there. You can put all the signs up you want, and
no, I guess we do carry a liability policy. We've got like $3 million liability policy. So if somebody does sue us, they've got to go through that before they get to us.
Yeah.
I think you need to have liability insurance, especially for your animals if they get out. But we don't have a problem with that. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? All right. I think that's it.
I've got one for you real quick. How long does it take to get that 80% back of that micro activity once they run that disc through the field?
Yeah, so you've got to reverse what you're doing. No bare soil, absolutely no bare soil. Try and get as much carbon out there trampled on the ground, and the life will come back. They found that earthworm holes in the soil profile are there 30 years later. 30 years that earthworm hole stays in your soil. What do you think that's doing for percolation of water? It's huge. Yes, Teddy.
The question I asked while ago still, I don't think you understood. When you drill in, I was comparing that with the hire, when you run a hire through it. You said you destroyed 80% of your...
Oh, yep.
Do you do the same thing when you no-till drill, when you drill in seed?
Well, the no-till drill, you're not going in very deep. Especially with grass seeds, you don't want it very deep. Matter of fact, you can see a lot of that grass seed laying on top of the ground with just a little bit of dirt around. That's up to you to make sure you have that thing set right. If you're, Gabe Brown, everybody asks Gabe, well, what's your idea of soil disturbance? Excessive tillage. What's your description of excessive tillage? And he says a row marker. So a row marker in your field, you know what a row marker is? You've got that arm laying down, it's got a little disc blade on it. If it's throwing dirt open, that's excessive tillage. You're killing soil life. So now he's developed a foam, like a soap. It puts it on top of the ground so you know where your next pass is. Folks, this tillage is just killing us. It really is. We just got to stop it. And there's more and more people. I saw my neighbor, he plowed this year. He plowed. I'm like, are you kidding me? He almost lost the farm. We had 19 inches of rain in July. Did I win all his topsoil? He ruined 2 fields, deep plowing it. Yep. So you can't do that. You just simply can't do that. Yep. All right. Thank you all.
One more.
Oh, one more. I'm sorry.
Is there? I mean, where we are, we're like have about maybe a half an inch, possibly an inch in some places of topsoil, and then it's all clay, rock, subsoil. Is there a way to speed up this process of getting the life into the soil and
There
getting
is.
it to build quicker?
First of all, you got to have a mob of animals, ruminants, and the best way to speed it up is get carbon on the ground. And if you can't grow any carbon, let's just say it won't even grow anything, you've got to haul something in there. And that's the form of hay. You've got to get some hay on it. And when you feed that hay on that land, you're not trying to get them to eat it all. You're trying to get them to waste, at least 40, 50% of it, laying that on the ground. And you don't want it so thick that it actually suffocates the ground. So I had a guy, he heard me speak, he went home, he unrolled 200 bales on his farm. 200. And I went out to the next spring, and I'm like, what did you do? Well, you said to unroll hay. I said, yeah, and feed animals with it. He didn't even feed any animals with it. He just unrolled hay. I said, your animals look like heck, your farm looks like heck. I said, you got to change what you're doing here. So when you unroll hay, don't get it so thick that it kills the soil out. And when you unroll it backwards, the opposite direction that the bale was rolled. So if it's rolled up this direction, you want to unroll it the other direction. That means you're going to have a lot longer windrow. You can cover more ground with it. That's what you're trying to do. With every bale you unroll, you're trying to cover as much ground as you can with that bale. You know why? Because you're throwing seed, you're attracting more animal hooves and poop and pee to that strip. So the longer that strip is, you're getting more bang for your buck. That would be my suggestion. That's what I would do. Yep.
Anybody else? Thank you, Greg.
All right,
Appreciate
thank
it. Good job.